Everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for this Fair Districting press conference. We come together as we approach Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, our newest federal holiday, to once again demand protection of our right to vote and equal fair representation. My colleagues and I have just left the floor to stand as one for this very principle. The irony of the timing feels both appropriate and deeply disappointing. Today, the place in question is Louisiana, my home. But sadly, we know that the battle for voting rights and fundamental fairness knows no boundaries. The fundamental right of fairness, fair representation, and access to the ballot is under attack across our nation. I'm honored to be joined by my esteemed colleagues today to demand in one voice that the Louisiana legislature meet and produce fair maps to equitably represent all Louisianians with all deliberate speed. Like many in my home state, the state of Louisiana has a long, tragic history of diminishing and silencing the votes of African Americans. Yes, I stand here today with my voice to fight for democracy, and I will not be silenced. For years, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 stood sentinel, protecting the sacred right to vote. Now, with the recent gutting of the Voting Rights Act, fair representation again is under attack. Louisiana's 6 congressional seats. I proudly represent the people of the 2nd Congressional District, the only minority congressional district. I'm the only Democrat and the only Black member of our congressional delegation. However, Louisiana is 1/3 African American. Now, I learned fractions a long time ago, but even still today, I know that 1/3 is equivalent to 2/6. Some time ago, we were once considered 3/5 a person. I know the Constitution used to treat us that way, but a war was fought to change that. And I've consistently said Louisiana deserves a 2nd majority-minority seat. The math demands that African Americans have another seat in Louisiana. However, my former colleagues of the GOP-led state legislature didn't use the same calculus, didn't use the same math, didn't recognize or acknowledge that the population has shifted, and we now have the numbers to support a 2nd African-American congressional seat. Unfortunately, it appears that a political calculus was used instead. But now Louisiana stands at the precipice of redrawing our congressional maps again after a federal court threw out the illegal, unfair maps drawn by the legislature. The judge rules that these maps violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the section that prohibits voting practices and procedures that discriminate on the basis of race. Now, the Louisiana legislature has been called into a special session, which just began a few hours ago, where they are charged with drawing maps consistent with the Voting Rights Act. It is a disrespectful to the generations of the struggle of African Americans and have endured for so many years to fight for the right to vote. We've marched, we sat down, we've bled, we've died for our voting rights. They will not be denied. We will not retreat. We will not simply walk away. We will make sure that our rights and our voices are heard. We must begin to overcome our state's tarnished past and move toward fair maps that follow the math and gives Black Louisianians their rightful representation in our democratic system. I call on my former colleagues in the legislature to do the right thing for their constituents, for their state, by drawing fair districts that truly represent all of Louisiana. Then at a federal level, we must act to reinvigorate the Voting Rights Act of our nation. We must overcome the stalemate and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Negotiations led to a bipartisan agreement on gun violence prevention. They can and should lead to action on voting rights and protecting our democracy. I'd like to thank our illustrious chair, Joyce Beatty, the phenomenal whip, Clyburn, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, Congressman Butterfield, Congresswoman Sewell, Caucus Chair, Congressman Jeffries, Congressman Horsford, Congressman Neguse, Congresswoman Williams, and all of my other distinguished CBC colleagues that are here today. Thank you for standing shoulder to shoulder with me on this issue and all issues that affect fairness and what's right for our country. Thank you also for the dedicated advocates on the ground in Louisiana who are working diligently to fight for this redrawn map based on racial division. The ACLU, Power Coalition, Together Louisiana, Legislative Black Caucus, Black Voters Matter, and so many others that have been a part of working and fighting and standing and not retreating, even though the pressure has been to back down. I want to personally thank Governor John Bel Edwards for recognizing the misstep, the violation, the maps that ignored African-American population and vetoing it. And I ask that my members do the right thing in Louisiana. I'm now excited and honored to have stand with me and to bring up to the podium next our incredible leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty from the great state of Ohio, who is an illustrious, outstanding, incredible leader to share comments.
First of all, let me just say again to our colleague and our leader of today's press conference, to Troy Carter, thank you. We know all too well what's happening in your state because it's happening across the United States. So we come today to tell you that we are standing here fighting for our democracy. We are standing here protecting our rights to vote. Certainly, as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, it gives me great honor to be here. But I also hail from the great state of Ohio. We too know what happens during redistricting and when we don't have our lines drawn fairly. We know when Democrats vote, when lines are drawn fairly, we win. Let me just say to you, I'm here today to talk about a story that's older than America itself. The systemic diminishing and silencing of African Americans' votes and voices. From poll tax to literacy tests to violent mobs, politicians who feared the Black political power have done everything possible to diminish and disenfranchise us. But we're here today to speak out. Today, their main weapon against our influence is to break up our population's impact through gerrymandering. And now there is more evidence that in the state of Louisiana has the third largest Black population per capita, just behind the District of Columbia and Mississippi. Nearly 1 in 3 people in Louisiana are Black. So it stands to reason that a third of Louisiana's congressional seats would have a Black majority. But we know that is not the case. Louisiana must pass maps that polish their tarnished past and give people of color their right to participate meaningfully in the congressional elections. Lastly, the state legislature, all too well we know that. Many of us have served in the state legislature, that they must follow the charge of the federal court by drawing fair congressional maps that will allow every community to be heard by their members of Congress. And let me just say, as African Americans, we know all too well, and we stand here today because our vote is our power, and protect it is our message. That's our message. That's our power. It gives me great pleasure to ask next to come to the mic our Democratic Caucus leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who will be followed by Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank the distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus for her continued and steadfast leadership in so many different areas, including in the area of fair and just representation. And of course, I thank my good friend and our colleague, Representative Troy Carter, for his strong and steadfast leadership in ensuring that the African-American community in the great state of Louisiana has fair and equitable representation and an opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice. All across the country, we have seen an assault on Black representation, on districts that have historically been represented by African-Americans here in Congress, and on Black communities as a result of what has occurred during this redistricting process. We've seen it in North Carolina, we've seen it in Ohio, we've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in Alabama. We're now seeing it in Louisiana, and we certainly saw it in New York State, where an unelected out-of-town special master degraded the Black population in 4 different New York City-based congressional districts. And so we gather here today to address the situation in Louisiana, understanding that though Jim Crow may be dead, he still got some nieces and nephews that are alive and well. And some of the tactics that we've seen deployed over the years are being deployed right now. The federal court has spoken with respect to the congressional map in Louisiana. The Voting Rights Act is clear with respect to the congressional map in Louisiana. The Constitution is clear with respect to what should take place in terms of the congressional map in Louisiana. And that is why we need the Louisiana legislature to do your job and create 2 congressional districts where an African-American community and communities have the opportunity to elect the candidates of their choice.
Standing here today, I'm very proud to stand with Congressman Troy Carter, who could be selfish and quiet. Let me proudly say that that is not him, that is not his representation, and that is not his definition. I'm honored to be here with the distinguished members of the Congressional Black Caucus, our message, our power, but sad to be here in the week that we commemorate Juneteenth, to have to fall victim to the elimination of representation. Just a quick journey. We're reminded of 1865, 2 years delayed for those west of the Mississippi to learn that they were even free. That was Juneteenth. Shortly thereafter, they eliminated slavery, except for a small provision in the 13th Amendment, provided due process in the 14th Amendment, and gave the unfettered right to vote in the 15th Amendment. But yet, throughout the end of the 19th century and the 20th century, over and over again, persons were denied the right to vote, intimidated away from the polls, and certainly denied any representation until 1965, when we opened it up to create opportunities that ultimately elected Barbara Jordan from Texas. Shortly thereafter, even in New York, up south, Shirley Chisholm came to the United States Congress. But yet, now 57 years later, there is this hand of oppression that has now wanted to squash Black districts across America, from west to east, from south to north, from the Midwestern states to New York, upstate, down south, and over to the west in Texas. In Texas, where there is a lawsuit, 2 members, historically Black districts, 2 members were placed in 1 district. So to Congressman Carter, I am standing with you so that the hand of oppression, now 57 years after the 1965 Voting Rights Act and all the work that our colleagues have done, including my friend from Alabama and the late John Lewis, all that has been done, we are still working to ensure that there is representation for all people, that there is 1 vote, 1 voice, and that people recognize 1 voice, 1 vote. And so it is clear the math does not add up. I stand with the congressman to ask for the legislature to do its job and for there to be the full representation of the people of Louisiana that would include 2 African elected or districts that people can pick a person of their choosing. That is the underpinnings of the Voting Rights Act and Section 5. And so, Louisiana, we see you. We want to hear you. We want to hear you create through the legislature the fair process so that the hand of oppression can come off of us and representation can rise. I thank the gentleman very much. It's my pleasure to yield to the distinguished gentleman, former judge from North Carolina, the Honorable Congressman G.K. Butterfield.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and let me thank all of you for coming out this afternoon in this very humid temperature to cover what we have to say. I am Congressman G.K. Butterfield, representing the 1st District of North Carolina. Also serve as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Elections in the U.S. Congress. Before coming to Congress, many of you may not know this, I was a voting rights attorney in the 1980s. After that, I was elected as a Superior Court judge and later a Supreme Court justice in North Carolina. Have now served in Congress for the last 18 years. All of that to say that I know a little bit about the Voting Rights Act. I have read the opinion of Judge Dick from the Middle District of Louisiana, and she has written a very, very scholarly opinion. It interprets Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act very accurately. And so I'm here today to support Congressman Troy Carter, and I want to thank him for his leadership and his tenacity and all that he does for the people of his congressional district in Louisiana. But I'm here today to support the whole notion of requiring the legislature in Louisiana to redraw these districts to enable African-American voters to have an equal opportunity to elect members of Congress to the United States House of Representatives. This is the basis of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And I want to just close by just reading 2 sentences from the judge's order, which I think summarizes this whole matter. She says, for the reasons set herein, the court concludes that the plaintiffs are substantially likely to prevail on the merits of their claims brought under Section 2. The court finds that absent injunctive relief, the movements are substantially likely to suffer irreparable harm. What the court said is that African-American voters in Louisiana will suffer irreparable harm unless the legislature is required to redraw the lines and create a majority Black district in that state. And so I support Congressman Carter and urge my friends in Louisiana to enforce the Voting Rights Act as it was intended. Thank you. This time I yield to my friend from Alabama, state of Alabama, Congresswoman Terri Sewell, who is the author of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and is a leader on voting rights.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure for me to join with my colleagues of the Congressional Black Caucus to support the efforts of Representative Troy Carter in doing justice, not only for his own constituents, but the constituents of Louisiana. I'm Congresswoman Sewell, and I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. It was in my hometown 57 years ago where John Lewis and the foot soldiers shed blood on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. Across this nation, we've seen states redraw the congressional maps for the first time since the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted by the Supreme Court in 2013. These decisions will impact voters for the next decade, but they're being done without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. In many states, lawmakers are packing African Americans into few districts to dilute their political power. In my home state of Alabama, we too, like Louisiana, make up 1/3 of the population of the state of Alabama, and yet we only have one majority-minority district, of which I am proud to serve. But the math does not add up, as my friend from Louisiana said. We should have at least 2 majority-minority districts in the state of Alabama. In a court order, the lower court, district court, ordered the state of Alabama to create a 2nd majority-minority district. But this decision was reversed by the Supreme Court. This was yet another blow for the fight for fair Black representation that is at the very heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This ruling allows the votes of Black Alabamians to once again be diluted and further deteriorate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So I am proud to stand with my colleague in Louisiana. We do so because we are kindred spirits in Alabama. We share the same problem, and we have the same solution, which is to restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act and pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. These state legislatures must do their job and draw fair maps that will allow African Americans to have their fair share of these elected seats. I thank him for his courage and I wish him luck, but more importantly, know that you do not stand alone. We stand with you in the Congressional Black Caucus because we know our strength is our power and we know our vote is our voice. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. I cannot thank my colleagues enough for standing in this sweltering heat to stand up for what is right, what is fair. And we as a caucus and we as Louisianians and we as Americans, we don't want anything more and will accept nothing less than what's fair, right, and just. Louisiana, my dear friends in Louisiana's legislature, do the right thing. Do the math. Add a second African-American district to the state of Louisiana. Thank you and God bless you.